All righty. It's getting nice and quiet here. Everybody take your seats, and I'm going to have the pleasure to introduce the next speaker, George Braley. Now, George Braley, as you all know, is from the famous Tornado Alley, but you probably don't know why the name of their company is called Tornado Alley. Brawley, I'm sorry.
That's okay. They need something else plugged in here.
Okay. Power?
No, this is...
That's a power plug. I'm going to put that in the back.
That's one of these here.
Mike? Does that do it? Try that one. Did that do it? They're not.
Anything back there, Bob?
You got what you want, Bob? Turbo Bob. Nope. Want to try this one? Power?
Didn't hear you. Still can't hear him.
They're just going to zoom in on the slides.
Okay,
Okay.
very good.
Okay, I was corrected as Brawley, George Brawley, sorry. So anyway, Tornado Alley is named because there's a tremendous amount of tornadoes that go through that part of the country. Now you might know that, but you might not know that in Ada, Oklahoma is famous for one thing. It was the last time they had a public hanging, 4 men hanging at one time. So anyway, George Brawley has this wonderful course. You can come down there and learn everything you need to know on a weekend about engine management. It's wonderful. My husband went. I'm sorry I didn't get to go. And they had a great time, and he's going to give you a lot of great tips. And if you have any questions, he's got an exhibit down on the exhibit floor. But I do want to say one thing. He has a deep, dark secret that I'm sure he's going to kill me if I tell everybody. Besides being an incredible creator and a manufacturer in the turbo, he happens to be a lawyer. So, George Brawley.
Good morning. The comment about 4 men hanging, if you go Google up the phrase 4 men hanging, you'll find an interesting reference to a newspaper article in the Ardmore, Oklahoma newspaper. That's not the Ada paper, it's the next town over, on the 20th of April of 1909. And they lynched in an old-fashioned break-them-out-of-jail lynching, the last of those events recorded in the Old West on that morning. It's a marvelous story about the end of the Old West, and really the hanging of Tom Horn is probably the second to the last seminal event, and the 4 men hanging in Ada, Oklahoma is probably the seminal event, singular event that marks the end of the Old West. So we're back and pleased to be here. Want to talk to you today about some interesting developments. As you know, we brought an experimental turbo to migration 3 years ago, and as they say, the rest is a lot of history. I want to cover some preliminary matters right quick. First off, that's not much of a pointer. Let me try a bigger pointer. A little better. All of you for the help. We've had a lot of support from a lot of our owners, both Bonanza and now some 850 Cirrus owners over the last 3 years. We are now a full Cirrus service center. And if you've got a turbo-related problem, we can certainly provide complete and plenary support for the entire range of those things. We also do all the rest of the service center work, except we do not have an avionics shop yet, although we may cure that problem. But we've got really good local accommodations, and if you ask real nice, we'll loan you our courtesy car. We think it's a unique airport courtesy car, It's a 1974 Junker Rolls Royce. Literally owned by a little old lady, a widow, and it's got about, 16,000 miles on it. We've got a wonderful new facility. Our director of maintenance is second to none, and the mechanics that we have there have got more experience working on these turbo systems than anybody. We answer a lot of phone calls, glad to do that. We pride ourselves in the support that we give to Cirrus from their regional and national service manager. And at the present time, we are beginning to do some aftermarket turbo installs. There's not been a flood of those because we haven't been able to support them. We had a lot of those questions at the beginning of when we could begin to do those when we started supporting the factory. And our position has always been that Cirrus brought us to this dance, and it was our obligation to support the factory and be able to do that comfortably and completely and do it without losing a step or losing sleep before we could make a commitment to the aftermarket. So I think we've gotten to that point on the turbo systems. I know that Kenny Sherrado's shop out at Las Vegas is doing I think the first aftermarket install that's been done outside of our facility in Oklahoma. So here's where it began. This is actually the first experimental TNSR-22 that we brought here to Duluth for M4, I believe, in June of 2006. And this is the airplane that truly brought high performance single-engine airplanes to the Cirrus lineup and put them in the speed and class range of a Bonanza or a Cessna T210. Also, just as an aside, I took Kurt Sanford for a ride secretly during M4, and as we were cruising around at 12 or 14,000 feet, Kurt makes the muttered comment to himself, "Aha, 200 knots, true airspeed, the magic Mach 1 for piston-powered aircraft." So fast forward 3 years into the future, and about 850 wonderful turbo-normalized Cirrus airplanes later, to June of this year, and this is the airplane that we bring to migration. Notice one thing has not changed. This little thing on the side of the airplane.
George, could you taxi a little closer to the mic? You're walking on me. Just swing it over a little bit towards you.
Sure. I'm supposed to have a throat mic, but I guess that's not coming through for you. So this airplane is also an experimental, and it's the one that we brought this year. And of course, there's Tim adjusting his hat, and this gentleman filling the fuel to the tabs because we had a few flights to make. So why is it experimental? Anybody? So we sent Kurt out to investigate. He happened to be around. He gets up on the wing, he opens the door, he gets around, drives off. I run into him in the elevator. He says, "What did you do? Put automated cowl flaps on it?" Kurt, not exactly. He said, "Well, you had to." "Why is that?" He said, "Because obviously you did something to make it go faster or you wouldn't have brought it here. And that's the only thing I can think of because you've already gotten all out of that engine you can get out of that engine." Kurt, that's a fair assessment of your comment? But he was wrong. We brought it, let's see. This is a screenshot taken at one point in our flight up here. And we weren't very high. And this is a screenshot taken 10 minutes later. Both of them straight and level in cruise. Both of them straight and level in cruise. And there's about 7 knots difference. Kurt, there is something more to be had from that engine. There's a nice 7 knots more to be had. And actually, from a couple of guys at Cirrus that have flown it, one of them says it's like 8 knots, and the other one thinks it's 10 knots. But I think they may be right, but for right now, let's just call it 7 to 10, and that way I won't get misquoted later on if somebody else's estimates turn out to be more optimistic than my observations. So, thank you very much. Where do I leave the lavalier? Oh, maybe you want to know more. Yeah, that's all done just in Photoshop. That's why. So, some of you have seen this before when we teach the Advanced Pilot Seminar class, but it's one of my really favorite quotations about engines and the world that we live in. And it really did start with these guys down in the corner and that unique and perfect little airplane that they flew over 100 years ago. And here's the definition of an engine. Charles Fayette Taylor holds the Sloan seat of engineering at MIT that was established by Sloan when Sloan was the president of General Motors back in the 30s. And he held that seat for 40 or 50 years, I think. And he's written the seminal textbooks on the subject of internal combustion engines, which, for such an incredibly dry subject, contains several real zingers. Here's another one. In my many years working with engines, I am unaware of any person who has ever complained about an engine with too much horsepower. And of course, as we fly airplanes, that's a universal aspiration of all of us. So here's how we do it. We have this wonderful little device that we have installed on this airplane that we've been working on for a very long time. Hey, look, we got to have some fun as we go through life. I'll tell you about World Peace here in a second. But before I tell you about World Peace, let me talk about the rest of this thing. It's really simple. It's an on-off button. You press it and hold it for 3 seconds and it turns it off. You press it briefly and it turns it on. And there's a channel selector for channel 1 and channel 2 because the device is a completely redundant dual-channel unit that drives a stepper motor which drives the wastegate. The stepper motor is a dual-wound stepper motor that's qualified exactly the same way as the throttle motors on a Part 25 jet. And finally, we've gotten away from the 1962 Garrett-designed pneumatic hydro-mechanical control systems that we've all been living with all of these years. We've got about 40 flight hours on this unit. We've had since hour number 5, it's got about 35 hours of running absolutely flawlessly since we did a little debugging, which I'll show you a little bit about in a minute. And so far it is working absolutely flawlessly. At least a half a dozen pilots other than myself have flown it, most of them with vastly more experience than I have in my mere 42 years and 10,000 hours of flight and flight test time. And it really is nice. And it does some magic things. But it does some other things that are sort of right off the top of your head. Oh, gee, why hasn't somebody done this before? For instance, this little thing. This little thing right here. This is something that my good friend, hopefully your good friend, Mike Bush, will absolutely love. In So I gave it a name. This is the Ask Sam device on this little gizmo. How many people in here have had to ask your mechanic to adjust your absolute pressure controller? Fly serious. Anybody here owns a turbocharged airplane that has not had to ask a mechanic to adjust the absolute pressure controller? Not a single response. That means that there's a 100% uptake on the duty of asking the mechanic to take the cowl off the airplane and guess at where the set point is, depending on whether the oil is cold or hot, or it's a hot day or a cold day, or how calibrated his screwdriver is when he tries to make a 1/16th turn with his flathead screwdriver upside down and forgets that upside down clockwise is counterclockwise, or vice versa, and then has to do it again and again and again. In this case, to get the manifold pressure set correctly, simply get in the airplane, run it up to full power, note the outside air temperature, you go into a lookup table and make the fine adjustment with a screwdriver on the panel, put the plug back in, and you're done once forever. Over the life of your ownership experience, not paying that maintenance bill will pay for the cost of this device all by itself, just in the reduced maintenance effort. In my experience at Cirrus, they typically have to take the cowl off and on 3 to 5 times to get the set point properly set on the 1962 Garrett designed pneumatic hydromechanical control system, and now that gets done with a nice little appropriate screwdriver.
You adjusted it into the red arrow, there's a little adjustment there, is that what you're saying?
You insert the appropriate restrictive device in the hole and turn it left and right, and you can adjust the manifold pressure by something on the order of plus or minus 3/4 of an inch, which lets you get it set exactly where it's supposed to, and then the mechanic puts a bull plug back in it and a pasty over it, seals it up, and it's a done deal. Pardon? Yes. But the FAA will make sure it's the right idiot that does it. So other things. Oh yeah, this little thing that everybody was enjoying the chuckle over. It has something to do with this, and frankly you're going to have to indulge me because I'm not going to talk about it very much. But it's really nice and it works really well. And the chuckle story with this goes like this. When the mechanics were installing this on our airplane, they had this little toggle switch that you see right here. And I was out fussing around the airplane, wanting them to hurry up because I was wanting to go fly. And finally, one of our lead mechanics, a young guy by the name of Pacer, turns around and says, "George, how do you want me to label this?" And I said, that's a good question. I hadn't thought about it. It does this, it does that. It's really neat. It's, Pacer, it's better than canned beer. About that time, my cell phone rang. And I caught the cell phone and had to go do something, and I trotted off. One thing led to another, and about 2 hours later, I came back. And I noticed as I came back to the airplane that all the mechanics scattered like, rats or something. They were all hiding, busy turning wrenches, adjusting torque wrenches, over and over. And I look around, I'm looking at the airplane, I look inside, and I see this little switch here. And, okay, guys, come over here. So they all kind of slowly gather back around, and they're kind of looking around and shuffling their feet back and forth. And I said, "Who did this?" And they all look at each other, and finally, sort of like, "What's my line?" They all finally look at the right person. It's Pacer. And I said, "Pacer," I said, "what's going on here?" And he said, "Well, George, you didn't know what to call it. You told me it was better than canned beer. The only thing I know of that's better than canned beer is world peace." So that's what he put on there. And I took one look at it and looked around at all of them standing there giggling, and I said, "The first one of you guys that takes that off of there is fired." But it's a unique additional feature. This unit is a density controller You see it installed here, where the stepper motor is in the little can. The electronic box is up here, and I'll show that to you here in a minute. One of the beauties of this is you get rid of multiple oil lines that carry oil under pressure that are potential engine failure points if somebody forgets to torque one properly. And there is, to my knowledge, at least one airplane that made an emergency landing on a highway because somebody failed to properly torque one of those oil lines that is no longer necessary with this installation. So that unit sits in that location. The electronics box, there's a close-up of it. You can see the linkage where it hooks into the wastegate. The electronic control unit is mounted on the firewall in exactly the same place where the existing absolute pressure controller mounts. You take off the absolute controller, you put this thing on. It can be installed and removed and installed a second time in roughly 20 minutes. There's a little further close-up. You'll notice this little heat shield. We started out without that, which was the result for some modest delay. It turns out that the oil cooler is sitting just forward of this unit right over here, and the oil cooler was dumping lots of hot air directly onto the box, and the box temperature was going up to about 350 degrees because of the oil cooler, and we managed to fry a couple of things. So with the addition of the heat shield and the little blast tube that you see right there, that's a half-inch blast tube, the box temperature dropped back to a nice, comfortable 130, 150 degrees under all conditions. And since that slight modification, the flight test program has gone without a hitch. So let's talk about the Tornado Alley density controller and what it will mean for you guys and ladies. One of the things that all of you love to do are Lena Peak climbs. Anybody in here that owns a turbocharged Cirrus that does not occasionally do a Lena Peak climb? 2 hands. Okay. 3 hands. All the rest of you that own those airplanes are routinely doing Lena Peak climbs. You know, when we started this, I had this discussion with Cirrus and their flight test people, because the flight test guys at Cirrus, before this was even certified, were doing Lena Peak climbs. I was doing Lena Peak climbs. Nobody had ever approved a Lena Peak climb before, and the notion was considered to be heretical. We had a very candid conversation with the very, very good Cirrus flight test people, whom I hold in very high regard. And my bottom line take on it was, look, the pilots are going to do this. Whether we put it in the flight manual or not, they're going to do it because it makes so much sense. Let's at least put it in the flight manual and tell them how to do it right. And so the only flight manual in existence on a general aviation airplane that even begins to deal with this subject is the Cirrus Turbo Flight Manual, which tells you how to do Lena Peak climbs. And if you actually read the thing, what it says is this works pretty well, especially in cooler weather, but it may not be possible to do this in warmer weather and still manage the cylinder heads. The density controller dramatically improves that situation. Will it make it possible under all completely adverse conditions? Probably not. Will it make it possible under a much, much larger environmental envelope? Absolutely, yes, it will. In fact, think about this on, let's say, 112 degree day. Anybody from Phoenix? Anybody from Arizona? Yeah. Anybody ever been to Phoenix in August? Yeah, we all remember that, don't we? Mm-hmm. So you've got your Turbo Whiz-Bang Cirrus sitting on the ground in Phoenix in August, and you're getting ready to take off, and the runway is probably 125 if the ambient's 112. So you got this heat thing coming off the runway. You've got a 310 horsepower standard day engine, but how much horsepower is that engine going to be making when you get ready to leave Phoenix? Anybody want to take a guess? Give me a number, somebody. Pardon? Okay, the 250 guess is the closest, probably between 250 and maybe at most 265, somewhere in that neighborhood. And so that's what you get to use for takeoff and most of the initial climb, or all of it if there happens to be a temperature inversion going on. So if you install the density controller on this airplane, did I mention that when you take off all the 1962 pneumatic hydromechanical controls and the associated oil lines, and you install this thing, the airplane picks up about 2.5 to 3 pounds in useful load because it's lighter. With the density controller, when you come off the ground, you're going to have 310 horsepower. And it's going to fly just like it does on a 60-degree day in Duluth, only it's going to be a 112-degree day in Phoenix. The result of that is that the airplane is going to do its Lena Peak climbs at about an additional 200 to 300 feet per minute over what it would otherwise do. And that makes the Lena Peak climb process a lot nicer, especially when it's bumpier and all that other stuff. So there's, some fairly significant operational advantages. When you take off on a hot day from Aspen or a hot day from Telluride or Pagosa Springs or Durango or one of those lovely places, one of the things that many pilots flying turbocharged airplanes, frankly, don't fully appreciate is that the turbocharger does a good job of maintaining pressure, but there's another factor in the equation for the engine, and that's temperature. And this device watches the induction air temperature and adjusts the pressure in such a manner as to maintain a constant density on the full throttle airflow that goes through the engine. A constant density of air that is adequate to let the engine provide a full 310 horsepower under extremely adverse environmental conditions. Some more about it in general. We've got this world-class engine test facility, and for a very long time we have been focused on fuels issues. And a lot of you know that we originally started testing and actually did fully test a PRISM electronic engine system, and were able to demonstrate and run a Lycoming TIO 540 J2BD 350 horsepower, mother of them all, most difficult engine in the fleet on our PRISM system, and do that on unleaded avgas now some 7 or 8 years ago. There are some issues with that technology with respect to the sensors. We've been fighting those. I think we're getting close to resolving those. In the meantime, we continued to work and expanded our work on the turbo normalizing systems. And about 3 years ago, when we were getting ready to do this Cirrus turbo normalizing project, it dawned on me that the electronic ignition system was an important part of the roadway towards operating our piston engines on unleaded avgas. But there actually was a prerequisite, and that is that we had to figure out a way to gracefully get control of the mass airflow through the engine. And that was the prerequisite to adding lots of the other bells and whistles that were being considered as part of the now multiple failed FADEC efforts that have gone before. And thus, we started to focus on an effort to fully get control of the mass airflow through the internal combustion piston engine. And to let you appreciate a little bit of how our focus has been on that and how precisely we've been oriented towards doing this, in the summer of 2006, we were doing the original certification flight test for the turbo-normalized Cirrus. For those flight tests, the manifold pressure exquisitely and painfully got precisely set through the process of taking the cowl on and off and turning this flat blade screwdriver a 1/16 of a turn left and right to 29.6 inches. And then the plane got loaded up and we did gross weight climbs hot day climbs. We did hot fuel tests. We did detonation tests. We got all that done and qualified. But we had put into the test plan a second series of tests, which we then began to execute. And we did that by taking the cowl off, going into the absolute pressure controller, and cranking up the absolute pressure controller to levels that would be consistent with where we knew an electronic density controller would ultimately take the engine under hot day conditions. And then we repeated all of those same tests while we had the airplane conformed and while we had the airplane in test condition and while we had an approved test plan. And thus all of the flight test data to support this density controller is actually already in the can, in the box, and approved data. So the certification path from this point forward is relatively straightforward in terms of being able to field these guys. But we recognized something a little more than 3 years or so ago that in order to do an unleaded avgas, a 94, 95 motor octane unleaded avgas, and to do it right, that we first had to get control of the mass airflow through the engine so that it could be managed in an intelligent manner. And this density controller will do that for us. It's an infrastructure building block for a lot of things. That box that you saw sitting on the panel a minute ago has got some empty rails for some further electronic circuit boards for some nice stuff. It has the appropriate connections, wiring harness, pinouts, and everything for the Prism electronic ignition system. And it has something for an electronic wait a minute, that's not the right. What's this? Oh, how about an electronic mixture control? Would you like one of those? Would you really like one of those? Yeah, well, we've got it running on the test stand right now. It's not yet flying. But it is fully integrated with the density controller. And we expect it to be flying before the end of this summer, if not sooner yet than that. And it has the capability of doing some other really nice things that are provided for in this same architecture. So this is our commitment to the Cirrus community. These are troubling and difficult times. As Brent Waters said, there's a lot of difficult choices that have had to be made. We have continually taken all of the resources that came to us from all of our various business activities with General Aviation Modifications and with Tornado Alley, and we probably spend a higher percentage of our revenue stream on R&D than anybody else in aviation. And we do that in order to bring products. We do that because Tim and I, we get out and fly behind these airplanes, and every time we get out and fly behind our equipment or somebody else's equipment, we come back with a page of notes on things that need to be done and need to be done differently. And so we're going to devote our best resources and efforts towards continuing to bring these products to you folks as fast as we can possibly get that done. Questions? Okay, the questions were, when, I'm going to abbreviate his paragraph into when and how much. And actually it was when on the retrofit and how much is it going to cost. Now, a couple of hours ago, a much better speaker and certainly a much more agile person than I, and definitely much better looking and more handsome, by the name of Alan Klapmeyer was standing up here, and somebody asked him a very similar question, and I defer you to his response. I think his response was, I don't know and I don't know. But I'm going to try and hazard to provide a little more information and also let us enjoy this nicely. It's still under development. We think that it's reasonable to look for certification in the fourth quarter of this year or first quarter of next year on this device. In the past, we have worked with the OEMs, and because of their support, if and when they look and evaluate this and decide they want to use it, then we're probably going to provide them all of our devoted efforts until we can fully satisfy their needs. That's sort of the same thing we did with the turbochargers, and I think it was a fair and reasonable disposition. However, because there's a bunch of people in here that I know and that have proceeded and helped us, I am going to make all of you a short and sweet offer. And that is, if you will visit the president of COPA, Mr. Kurt Sanford, and get him to acknowledge to me that you have made a $200 donation to next year's COPA Party Fund. The next 8 of you that do that, I will see to it that one of these units is available for your airplane on a 1-for-1 basis with the first 10 units that go into the OEM certified aircraft that may go out there. Now, don't start a stampede for Kurt. The reason I say 8 instead of 10, because 2 people already heard about this and already did it, and one of them was Kurt. Okay, there's 8. Seriously, anybody in the room that wants to do this before they go out the door can get in on the deal, and we'll adjust the number accordingly. Does that answer your question in a satisfactory manner? Close enough for you. All right, other questions in the back? Yes, at some point it certainly will. I don't know the answer to that question right now, so I'm going to duck it. Okay? Yes, sir.
The density controller and the electronic wastegate separate topics, or are they?
No, it's an integrated package. Absolutely integrated package. They work together. I mean, it's a complete dual channel system. The sensor package for the thing, there's actually triply redundant sensors in the package. They vote out a valid signal that is used by either channel. It's got failure modes and fault modes that are absolutely benign. I was up with one test pilot a couple of weeks ago, and we were flying around, and he says, okay, I really like this. Show me the failure modes. I said, well, it's either going to fail and do something really wild and cause the wastegate to go fully closed, or it's going to fail and do something wild and cause the wastegate to go fully open. And if it does something in between, you're probably not going to care too much. So let's simulate both of those. And it turns out that for testing purposes, I've got a way to simulate those, and I can force the wastegate to one position or the other and then turn the unit off. And when it turns off, when the power fails, the wastegate fails in place. And so we were able to exercise the failure modes in both of those circumstances. And if it fails fully closed, you slam the throttle and the pressure relief valve pops off and it fully protects the engine. And you've still got full throttle control, and you can fly the Atlantic with it failed safely. If it fails wide open, you've basically got a normally aspirated plane at sea level. In fact, we failed it wide open and came back to Duluth and shot an approach and a missed approach with the unit failed wide open with virtually undetectable consequences to that exercise. So it's got some really, really nice, benign failure modes that are associated with it. Other questions? Yes, sir?
Why is that
I didn't hear a word you said because of the...
Why did you just
Well, the stepper motor properly configured will do the same thing.
George,
as
could
a
you repeat the
servo.
question? Sorry.
Yes, the question was a technical question. Why a stepper motor rather than a servo? That becomes a Bill Clinton sort of question about what the meaning of is. They accomplish the same thing. Another question. Yes, sir? The question, can I kiss you later? The question was, how does this make the Columbia speed compare to a Turbo Cirrus? You know, we all know that we love this Cirrus, and it's got more room in it, it's more comfortable, lots of things about it that we like better. But there's one thing about it that you just don't like having to say, yeah, it's a couple of knots faster, but. And then you go on with everything that comes after the three-letter word, but. You can take the three-letter word, but, out of your vocabulary in this context of this discussion, because if you are up there and flying along and your friend with his Columbia 400 takes off after you about 10 seconds in trail, and he comes up behind you and he punches the mic button and says, 23 Tango November, we're getting ready to start our formation. Can't you speed it up a little bit? I'm getting ready to pass you. And you can reach over there and engage the density controller and you can say, hey, watch this. Because this airplane is going to outrun the Columbia in cruise by something in the neighborhood of 3, 4, 5 to 7 or 8 knots. Paul, you had a question. Sure. The question was, how does this relate to PRISM? I'm going to try and explain a very complicated subject and keep it very simple. The question was, how does the density controller relate to PRISM? The notion that I mentioned before, when we looked at the PRISM system and we looked at the road path towards unleaded fuels, the conclusion that we came to at GAMI and Tornado Alley was that one of the things that needed to be done to make the operation of high-powered engines in an unleaded fuels environment as comfortable to the pilot and frankly as comfortable to the manufacturers of the equipment that the pilot is flying as exists in the present situation is that we needed a little intelligence in the way that we could manage the overall system. And part of the equation of managing the system, the problem is not the normal operational environment. The problem is the abnormal operational environment. And right now we don't have any intelligence in the system to deal with the abnormal operational environment. And right now we deal with the abnormal operational environment by creating huge, huge margins of protection from detonation and other bad things that can happen in the engine. And we use the huge margins to protect us from the less than skilled pilot or the less than attentive pilot. In order to compensate for losing some of those huge margins, we need to build some intelligence into this process. That intelligence needs to include not only how the sparks are managed for the ignition system, but it needs to include how the mass airflow is managed through the engine at the same time. And so the two work as partners. Now, the nice part of this is that all of the sensor package that's in this density controller, that's a qualified sensor package that's spitting out the right information, all of that stuff is stuff that would be needed by PRISM, or it's stuff that's needed by the electronic mixture controller. And so when you start to add some of this other stuff on there, the sensor package is already there and qualified, and qualifying the sensor package is a big deal. And so it makes those other steps a lot easier as we go along. Paul, did I answer your question to your satisfaction?
I'm not sure if people know what PRISM does.
PRISM is just a means of managing the ignition events in an engine, but it does it by looking at the internal cylinder pressures inside the combustion chamber. And there's some true magic in that process, which I probably don't have enough time to get into. But it's always been the right way to do it. It's just always been difficult to do because of less than perfectly adequate sensors that can withstand the combustion environment inside an internal combustion engine. Kurt in the back.
A couple questions coming in from the net. We've got 53 people in from the net. And what additional sensors does this package require, and will there be any modifications required to the Garmin or Avidyne software?
Okay, there are no additional sensors. All the sensors that this package needs are included inside the box. It does reach out and look at upper deck pressure, and it does reach out and look at manifold pressure, but that's done through a 3/16 diameter flexible pneumatic line. The sensors are internal to the box. Will it work with the Avidyne? It will work with Avidyne if Avidyne wants it to work with Avidyne. If Avidyne doesn't, there is a fairly straightforward workaround so that it will work gracefully with that system, either with or without their cooperation. The same is also true for the Garmin system. It's hard for me to believe that those folks might be reluctant to do this. We have had some extensive conversations with Avidyne in the past about this. They've expressed a fairly significant interest. In fact, some of the Avidyne people that are here doing the R9 stuff have in fact flown it, and I think they were rather favorably impressed with what they saw. So I would expect that at some point this is going to get integrated into the R9 system, but I don't have a commitment from those folks. I just know that they've seen it, flown it, and appeared to be favorably impressed. Next question.
But just a follow-up, but I imagine it does need the additional temperature sensor that you added in the Perspective system that's not currently in the Avidyne systems for the inlet temperature?
Yes, it does. That sensor, I'll correct myself, that sensor is not internal to the package, but we have developed a dual sensor that, for instance, goes with the Garmin package, which does have an IAT that goes to the Garmin. This dual sensor screws in the same spot. It's got two thermocouples in the same probe. So you leave the one hooked up to the Garmin and the other runs to the box, and it's a done deal. Takes care of it. Like I say, it's, we looked at those problems and we didn't design ourselves into a corner where if they refused to cooperate, we were helpless in being able to move forward. One of the great problems for general aviation as we go forward with these wonderful, wonderful glass panels is that it tends to put the owners at the mercy of the glass panel manufacturers in terms of upgrades and changes and modifications that might otherwise be nice for their airplanes that used to be accomplished by pulling, for example, the manifold pressure gauge out of the panel, sending it to the instrument shop and having them repaint the face of the instrument for $200. That's not quite that easy anymore. But like I say, there are relatively straightforward ways to deal with this in the absence of their full and complete cooperation. Yes, sir? Okay, I'm not sure I understood the question. Try me one more time. Okay, the question was, can we describe, for somebody considering an upgrade between the turbocharging system and possibly the Rod Sage forced air motive technology supercharger system, can I describe the advantages and the disadvantages? I have dealt with the technical aspects of that with some articles that are posted on the blogs on the Cirrus forum. And it really devolves into a technical discussion, but let me try and give you my bottom line on this subject. 8.5 to 1 compression ratio engines that have boost from wherever the boost comes from need to have fairly cool induction air. Regardless of where the boost comes from, in order for it to be cool, it needs an intercooler. If it doesn't have an intercooler, it's going to be hot. By hot, I mean it's going to be 165, 175, 180, 190 degrees on a hot day in Phoenix when it's 112 degrees outside. And those kinds of temperatures, in my experience, which I think includes more time in a test stand running fuels and doing detonation testing than anybody else in the North American continent except for two guys at the FAA facility in Atlantic City, is an unwise choice. Did I answer your question? Yes, sir.
This seems like, with the speed increase and everything, this would be a competitive advantage for Cirrus even beyond the current system. It seems like this would be something that would advance their purposes as well. Is this been enthusiastically received? Is this something that Cirrus is committed to put on NORCA?
Okay, the question was, is this additional speed advantage seems like it would be a competitive advantage and something that Cirrus would normally be enthusiastic about adopting and pursuing. You know, folks, Cirrus has got a long-standing and, in my view, very proper position that they don't talk about new products until they're there. They won't discuss them until they're there. And I think it's appropriate for me to honor that and to, divert any questions like that to Cirrus. Cirrus has always pursued new technologies and higher performance and done all those good things when it was appropriate and fit within their scheme of things. And so at such time as they deal with the subject, then they can deal with it, and I'm going to let them make any announcements in that regard. Yes, sir. Well, there is no magic to horsepower. It takes fuel. Oh, I'm sorry. The question was, okay, you're getting more speed. What does that do with respect to fuel flow? Is that a fair summary? And the answer is it burns more fuel to get more horsepower. But it burns at Lena Peak, and it burns it at a brake-specific fuel consumption that's literally down around 0.375 pounds per hour per horsepower, which is 10% better than a TSI 550C Columbia engine will do at similar horsepower levels, and is actually down at a level that is almost exactly the same as the real-world numbers that a Teelert diesel engine would produce. Okay? So it's an extremely efficient way. This is a green way to go, folks, because you can do Lena Peak climbs. It's as green as it gets for a general aviation aircraft. Yes. You're talking in the 18.5 gallon an hour range. Something less than 19. Okay. All right. How much time have we got? Pardon? Okay, thank you. Next question. The question is, will this still be the same dirt simple that it's always been with the Cirrus turbo normalized system? And the answer to that is it'll be simpler. Yeah, you won't end up having to deal with quite as narrow a margin range on temperatures as you did before. It'll especially be simpler on warmer, hotter days. Other questions? Anybody? All right, one more.
Ballpark, what is the additional boost you need the Netsy controller gives you for a day that's 15 above ISA?
It's an interesting calculation and an interesting. The question was, what is the additional boost that's required to make up for the loss of performance due to an unusually high temperature on a hot day? It's a straightforward calculation. It's simply the ratio of the temperature between a standard day and the reference day, or the actual day, and it's that ratio, and you take the square root of it, multiply it times 29.6, and you get the answer. In real world terms, on a hot day in Phoenix, you're looking at 32 and a half, 33 inches. Other questions? One more. The gentleman that asked the wonderful question about the Columbia. No, not you? All right. Thank you all. Oh, got one in the back. Well, that's what I told you I wasn't really going to talk to you about. It's an integral part of the system, but I'm not ready to talk about that one in public. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George.
Make your donations to Curtis, and Curtis, it's your obligation to give me a list of these guys and their N numbers.
We've got oh, you need N numbers also? Okay, everybody who signed up, come back and give me N numbers. I've got a list. I'd like everybody to sign up. We'll get your N number. We'll bill if you don't. It is probably the most convenient way. And then don't worry about the order. We'll randomize the order of the list. Sorry, Bob. So when we give you the list, we'll give it to you in a randomized way. So you don't have to fight over this piece of paper, okay?
I'll give my end number later.
I'm going to go there.
You got to fund the whole migration by doing it. Okay.
I have a friend. I want to go to the bathroom real quick.
If we want, yeah. The only other thing we should negotiate.
How you doing?
is to be designated as a computer contributor.
What are the rotors made out of? Inconel? An Inconel contributor?
Something down there below platform. Bronze.
Can't remember what it is.
Can't remember. What's my N number?
Now that one you should be able to remember.
I got it. I didn't remember that one.
It's non-existent warranty when you actually read it. I mean, after the Continental doesn't cover any Kelly turbocharger on a Columbia.
Well, at least I knew it had to be electronic.
After 6 months. Yeah, they don't cover any of these accessories. The only thing they cover is cylinder stuff. And they don't cover that very well.
Yep. I think we're all square.
Going to say things like, well, there's too much pressure.
Thank you.